Once upon a time, golf pros came together under one umbrella to compete in all tournaments. Records were broken, prizes were won, and endorsement deals were sealed due to the golfers' sterling performances. Things couldn't have been better on the PGA Tour. It was almost like a monopolistic system where the tour called the shots, determining who stayed and who left. I mean, they could do no wrong, right? But a few decades later, a new golf league was proposed to rival the PGA Tour, and to everyone's surprise, one of the tour's sworn enemies was elected to lead the rebel league. LIV Golf, backed by the Saudis, sparked widespread outrage throughout the golf community. But Greg Norman had other plans. Golf's civil war had just begun, and Norman wasn't bluffing, because it didn't take long until big names like Bryson DeChambeau, Dustin Johnson, and Cameron Smith already made the switch. The players were leaving in droves, and hell was about to let loose. But where did this leave the PGA Tour and the entire golf world? It was 1457 when the game was first mentioned in an Act of Scottish Parliament. Calls were made for it to be banned alongside football. King James II of Scotland prohibited the playing of golf because he believed it was a distraction from military training. He believed it was better for people to focus on archery, which he considered a more important sport because it could help in military training. The game was banned a couple more times in the 15th century and criticized as an unprofitable sport. But in 1502, the Treaty of Glasgow took effect and restrictions on playing golf were removed. Golf certainly evolved over the centuries, and professionals began competing against each other even in the United States. In 1895, over 10 professional golfers and 1 amateur played in the inaugural US Open in Newport, Rhode Island. And after that, more tournaments popped up across the country, like the Western Open in 1899. More and more people picked up an interest in golf, especially as American players improved. In fact, when John McDermott became the first American-born player to win the US Open in 1911, more Americans felt compelled to pick up golf clubs and head to the driving range. The excitement was like never before, and news spread far and wide that the average American golfer could outshine the best golfers from anywhere in the world. It sounded more like a challenge, which prompted 2 of the world's best, Harry Vardon and Ten Ray, to seek to disprove this growing sentiment. The Englishmen quickly purchased plane tickets and headed straight to Massachusetts in their quest to refute the notion. But what followed was nothing anybody expected. Francis Ouimet, who was just a 20-year-old amateur, schooled the pair on the rudiments of golf by defeating them in a playoff at Brookline, Massachusetts. Golf became front-page news, especially considering that 2 of the world's top players had lost to an amateur during an exhibition tour. But there was still no proper system like today's golf tours, and players didn't have a regular schedule to follow. So, on January 17, 1916, Rodman Wanamaker, the son of the founder of Wanamaker's department stores, hosted several leading amateur golfers and a group of golf pros at the Taplow Club in New York City. The Taplow Club gathering began a series of meetings over the next couple of months, and on April 10, 1916, the PGA Tour was officially established. The tour organized state open tournaments and would later be officially known as the circuit. The trio of Sam Snead, Byron Nelson, and Ben Hogan dominated golf in the mid-century, and all was well for about 30 or 40 years until Arnold Palmer stepped in. He made golf more popular and brought it to American homes through TV, and this was when the real tension began. With expanded television coverage, which led to increased revenue, the touring professionals wanted larger purses, while the PGA of America was more interested in using the funds to support the growth of the game at the local level. As if that wasn't enough, there were complaints among tour professionals regarding the venues and the presence of club professionals in major tournaments, such as the PGA Championship. This growing dissatisfaction among touring pros led to the formation of a separate entity, which eventually became the PGA Tour. So, it's safe to say, the tour has been around for over 5 decades, and even though it's had its fair share of battles and infighting, nothing truly threatened its existence. However, the biggest challenge was yet to come. In January 2020, reports had it that a rival league had been meeting with the players and agents behind the scenes. Now, this wouldn't be like the PGA or any other golf league. They were flirting with the idea of just 18 events, 48 players, and 12 teams, while promising $10 million with no cuts, along with a windfall for 12 team captains. This concept called the Premier Golf League, sounded really interesting and unlike anything the golf world had ever seen, but it still didn't seem like a threat, and the PGA Tour had nothing to worry about, right? Yeah, sounds like what a golfer on tour would think. I mean, after the Genesis Invitational in February of 2020, Tiger Woods admitted that his team had been approached and wrote it off, saying, "We've been down this road before. With World Golf Championships and other events being started, there's a lot of information that we're still looking at, and whether it's reality or not." Tiger wasn't alone in his skepticism. A week later, at the WGC Mexico Championship, Rory McIlroy expressed even stronger opposition, saying, "The more I've thought about it, the more I don't like it. My position is I'm against it, until there may come a day that I can't be against it. If everyone else goes, I might not have a choice, but at this point, I don't like what they're proposing." This wasn't just Tiger or Rory's opinion. I bet every pro golfer shared this sentiment, and there was no point in giving it a second thought. But that didn't stop the PGL from tweeting an open letter to the golf world to set the record straight. Shortly after the coronavirus pandemic, the PGL approached the DP World Tour with a merger proposal, but CEO Keith Pelley turned down the idea. While all this happened, there was one man on the sidelines who had a problem with the PGA Tour. Back in 1993, two-time major winner Greg Norman felt that golf needed more of a global presence, certainly more than what the American-based PGA Tour was offering. At the time, the top 5 players in the world, Norman, Nick Price, Nick Faldo, Jose Maria Olazabal, and Bernard Langer, were all born outside the United States. Of course, he had a point, but then the PGA Tour commissioner, Tim Fincham, quickly reacted to the perceived threat by sending a memo to its players, warning that anyone who took part in a World Tour event would risk suspension. Norman reflected on the incident in his 2006 book, The Way of the Shark, saying, "The more I thought about it, the more dejected I became." He held on to his resentment for over 30 years, and he went at it when the time was right. In May 2021, reports had it that a new league was attempting to poach PGA Tour players with deals ranging from $30 million to $100 million. Players linked to the move included Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson, Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, and many others. 3 months later, the man who held on to his resentment for over 3 decades was named the CEO of LIV Golf Investments, and he declared that this was just the beginning. The news was everywhere. Was this the beginning of the end for the PGA Tour? Would LIV Golf stand the test of time? Could it rival the PGA Tour? Pundits had their opinions, but the man at the center of the controversy, Greg Norman, couldn't care any less. LIV Golf Investment is backed by the Public Investment Fund, a sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia worth more than $500 billion. LIV Golf Investment committed a whopping $200 million in prize money to fund a series of 10 annual events on the Asian Tour over a 10-year period, starting in 2022. The rival tour was met with mixed reactions. Players who didn't fancy the idea shifted the narrative, saying that the league is sponsored by the Saudis, who were responsible for the 9/11 attack and the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. In other words, these guys are monsters and they're not welcome in America. But don't tell that to Phil Mickelson, who warned the PGA Tour that their greed might drive players to abandon the tour, and he had his reasons. "It's not public knowledge, all that goes on," Mickelson said. "Players lack access to their own media. The tour could neutralize any threat by returning media rights to the players. Instead, they prefer to allocate millions here and there, unwilling to relinquish control over roughly $20 billion in digital assets, or the $50+ million they earn annually from their media channel." This was Mickelson simply saying that LIV Golf wouldn't be a threat if the tour wasn't paying players just 26% of its revenue. Shortly after Mickelson's viral revelation, PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan sent a memo to the players outlining how 55% of the tour's revenue would be paid out to players in the form of prize money, bonuses, and other benefits. It was obvious that the pressure was mounting on the tour, and the real troubles were just beginning. LIV Golf unveiled an 8-tournament schedule dubbed the LIV Golf Invitational Series. Purses would be $20 million, with an additional $5 million set aside for the teams. The rival league wasn't too sure if it would be able to fill the 48 players, so it promised to pay out the full purse regardless of the number of players, with a total prize pool of $255 million for the 8 events, including $50 million allocated for the season-ending team championship. It was evident that LIV Golf meant business, and sure enough, within weeks, the Rebel League began collecting signatures. First, Phil Mickelson dumped the PGA Tour, saying he was on the winning side. He even promised to recruit more players from the tour. Next, there was Dustin Johnson, who backtracked after claiming he wouldn't join the Rebel Series. Following him, Sergio Garcia, Patrick Reed, Pat Perez, Bryson DeChambeau, Abraham Ancer, Cameron Smith, and a truckload of other golfers joined. It seemed like players were dumping the PGA Tour week after week, and Monahan's only response was to suspend the players who dared to make the risky move. But was it risky? I mean, think about it. The former world #1, Dustin Johnson, made around $74 million in PGA Prize Tour money throughout his career after turning pro in 2007. For a 4-year contract, LIV reportedly offered to pay him $125 million. The Big Phil was allegedly offered $200 million to jump to LIV, which is more than double what he made in total in his 30-year career. So, these guys were out for the money, just like Trump advised. In 2022, 11 Rebel golfers sued the PGA Tour, challenging their suspensions. LIV joined the lawsuit, and the PGA countersued. However, LIV golfers obviously had bigger worries. The rival tour players weren't eligible for world ranking points because the OWGR typically requires a tour to be in operation for a year before it will grant accreditation, mostly to see how it operates. LIV Golf has other roadblocks, such as its 48-player fields, lack of a 36-hole cut, and no weekly qualifying. So, the more they applied for eligibility, the more they were turned down. Soon enough, the players shifted focus to the majors, and just as they predicted, there was no restriction whatsoever on any LIV golfer from participating in the 4 majors. Chairman Fred Ridley stated that the Masters wouldn't get involved in the Gulf War. The US Open followed suit, and that settled the matter. It seemed like LIV Golf was winning the war after all. They offered hefty paychecks, lesser playing times, and everything the average tour pro dreamed about. However, Rory McIlroy and Tiger Woods remained the Rebel League's biggest critics. Tiger had previously proven his loyalty when he turned down a $1 billion deal. Now, that's really massive, and it goes to show just how loyal these guys were. At some point, it seemed like the golf world was essentially torn apart. Players dumped the PGA Tour, and so did their fans. Bryson DeChambeau even claimed that Tiger Woods hadn't spoken to him since he quit the tour. Tiger believed that the golfers who abandoned the tour for the Saudi-backed league were biting the hand that fed them. Comments like this, among many others, prompted the former president of the United States to offer his 2 cents. Trump was literally like Paul the Octopus, who predicted football matches. He warned that golfers loyal to the disloyal PGA would pay the big price when a merger with LIV comes. It made perfect sense for Trump to support LIV Golf. After all, 2 of his courses hosted events in 2022 and 2023. Trump's opinion sounded crazy at first, but in the summer of 2023, negotiations began between the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and Public Investment Fund. Rory refuted any connection between the meeting of PIF and the PGA Tour and a potential merger. However, reports indicate that Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan had secretly met with Yasir Al-Rumayyan, the governor of the PIF. Even in the course of the negotiations, the rival league kept collecting signatures, with the biggest being John Ram. However, it became clear that the tours just had to work together if there was any hope for unity. Despite the PGA Tour denying allegations for a long time, it's now obvious that a merger is on the way. But what remains uncertain is where all of this leaves LIV Golf CEO, Greg Norman. It appears that Norman's standing as CEO might only exist in title. Jay Monahan is the CEO of the newly formed entity, which technically makes him boss of LIV Golf, while Yasir Al-Rumayyan has a financial stake in the PGA Tour. This leaves Norman dangling in the wind somewhere. What about the players who chose loyalty over money, sticking with the PGA Tour over LIV Golf? Well, that's probably a story for another day.